Good evening and welcome. My name is Ginger Fay, and I'm one of the directors here at Applerouth Tutoring Services. We are a tutoring and test prep company. We help with students achieve their goals, whatever they might be, and we're thrilled to have you joining us tonight for the first stop on our Path to College program. Tonight, we're specifically talking about ninth graders starting their journey through high school and hopefully on to college. And I'm glad to share the experience and expertise that I've gathered along the way. I joke that I've been applying to college for more than 25 years. I have worked on every aspect of this process. I worked in college admissions at Duke University. I've read applications for Emory and for the Coca-Cola Scholars and the Cook Foundation scholarships as well. I've also worked on the high school side as a college counselor at a boarding school, Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, and a day school called the New School in Atlanta. And I have been at Applerouth for several years supporting other counselors in their work with students. So I'm thrilled to share what I know with you, and I hope you'll feel invited to ask every question that occurs to you, and we'll try and cram as many answers to those questions into the next hour as we possibly can. To get started, I have a question for you. I know 100% of you are here, but we'd like to know what else we could know about you tonight. I'd love to know if you are a student or a student supporter and where that student is on the journey. So if you could answer those questions and let us know how we might be able to be of help to you in this journey and in these steps in the process, we would be really grateful. So thank you for jumping in and participating in the poll. And we will get to questions in a little bit. I have a couple of things I want to share with you ahead of time, but we will be able hopefully to answer whatever questions you have. So feel free, please, to put your questions in the chat as they occur to you, and I will get to as many as we can before the end. I do want to mention that this recording will be available and sent to you if you're registered for the event, hopefully tomorrow. And we will also share the slides with you. And there are more events coming up in the Path to College, so we hope you'll join us for those if it's appropriate for your family. So I think it's always important to start with a goal. And so I want to start with the goals that we have for our program tonight. The first thing I really want to be able to do is share with you all a little bit about what's coming and what to expect. I am a parent in my own, in my other life, and I talk with a lot of my fellow parents, and their questions really are around not knowing what to expect, not knowing sort of when the trains are scheduled for. And so I want to be able to share a little bit of that timeline and expectations with you, what's coming next, so that you know how to focus in on what you need to do now. Because I think it is really important for students to focus on the present, even as they're preparing for the future, to really get the most out of the experience that they can while they're still in high school. There are friends to be made, there are adventures to be had, and pathways to explore, and I want them to be able to enjoy that, all the while knowing what's coming next, so that they're not surprised by it when it comes along. And most importantly, I want to be able to answer your questions. This is your chance to know anything you want from the inside out in terms of the college admissions process. And I'm glad to answer any questions along the way. So please put them in the Q&A box as they occur to you. Okay, so we're here tonight to focus on ninth grade, the start of high school traditionally. And I want to talk about three important things just from the start. One is that your ninth grade year should really be focused on making a really strong transition to high school. The jump from middle school to high school is certainly significant. I have an 8th grader in my house who is thinking about it constantly. And if you think back to where you were at this time last year, not knowing maybe you were going to a new school altogether or a new building, you were going to be the low man on the totem pole, having been an 8th grader and sort of large and in charge in middle school. That's a big jump. And so making a strong transition to high school is really key to that first year. And that means paying more attention to what you're doing now than what you'll be doing next, right? So you want to anticipate and be aware of what's coming, but you do really want to focus on the day-to-day, making good decisions, making good connections, building good relationships. The second thing is that notion of this will go down on your permanent record, that expression that we've all heard growing up. this is where your permanent record starts, is with high school. So this is the first year that your grades will count towards college admissions. So you want to make them count. I also have a junior who tells the eighth grader, you don't know how good you've got it right now. It's only getting harder from here. So it's great if you can focus on doing really well in the early part of high school. In the end, you'll be submitting your transcript to the colleges that you apply to, and your grades will be represented in many different ways, but part of that is a grade point average, an average of the 4 years that you spent in high school. And ninth grade counts as much as all the other years. So try and get some good grades in ninth grade. The key to having a really strong transcript when you apply to college is to really focus on balance when it comes to rigor. So that means not taking on more really challenging academic courses than you're ready for at any given time. So if you're doing very, very well in school, you might be ready for a little bit more of a challenge. But if you're not doing well yet, get those strong grades under your, get that strong footing before you start venturing into taking harder and harder classes. The harder classes will always be there when you're ready for them. And so the number of advanced or honors or even AP classes that might be right for another student may not be right for you. And you want to make sure that you're kind of paying attention to that balancing act. I had a colleague in admissions at Williams who used to say, you want to load the boat enough that it's worth the trip, but not so much that it starts to sink. So you want to find that balancing act. I personally have a 2-grade rule in terms of like knowing where you've hit that balance, right? So if you're taking a class that you normally would feel like you do pretty well in, and then you jump to honors, right? You take, or even to an AP class, and your grade starts to stumble a little bit. Maybe you go from being a strong A student to an A minus, maybe a B plus. We recognize it's a harder class. It's probably going to take you a little time to adjust, and you'll make that adjustment. But if your grade starts to slip from an A to a C, that's 2 grades, and that's too much. Or if taking that harder class in one discipline is pulling down not just that grade, but a grade in another course that you would otherwise have done well in, that's also 2 grades, and that might also be too much. So find the balance that's right for you, and don't worry too much about what everybody else is doing, and make sure you're making good choices for yourself. The other thing that I think is really important for ninth graders to think about is building a 4-year academic plan. What are the classes that are required for graduation from your high school? When will you take them? You do not want to be the person who has to meet with their counselor spring semester of senior year because you never did take that required PE class or that health class or something else that you just thought, oh, I'll get around to it eventually, and you never got around to it. So take a look at what the graduation requirements are and make sure that you sit them in their spot over the course of 4 years. Don't, try and swallow them all whole your freshman year. Don't put them all off until the end. They should be just sort of vitamins that are sort of sprinkled into each year. I always recommend that you start with your senior year and work backwards. So if you're lucky enough to know an older student at your high school, if you have a cousin or a sibling or a family friend, maybe your old babysitter who went through the high school, and they can tell you about like the best classes they took in high school, the teacher they enjoyed the most, think about that capstone, that senior year experience and what you want it to look like, and then work backwards to build a plan that gets you to that senior year. For example, if you would like to be, say, in an advanced math class your senior year, that means you have to start on that path in ninth grade, or you have to find a way to get caught up or move a little bit faster in order to get to the end result of that class. So start with a 4-year plan as a ninth grader, and then when you're a graduating senior and giving advice to incoming freshmen, you'll know that you're having the capstone experience of senior year that you're really looking forward to. A little bit of advice for you while you're at school. A couple of things. Number one, get to know your counselor. I hear from lots and lots of students that their school has a really high counselor to student ratio, or I guess I should say high student to counselor ratio, meaning that there are several hundred students for every counselor. How could my counselor ever get to know me? It's up to you to make sure your counselor knows you. And in the end, most of the time, your counselor is going to be writing one of your recommendations for college. And the extent to which they do a great job with that recommendation really depends on how well you've let them get to know you. So make sure that you are getting into them, getting into their office, talking with them about questions that you have, getting their advice. They've been through this a lot before. They're usually wizards about the schedule too. They know like, oh, you can't actually take AP Stats and AP Human Geography at the same time because they're both offered in the same block of time. And so you have to take them at different years. So let's set out again, back to that 4-year plan to make sure if those are 2 classes you want to take, that there's time to take them over the course of 4 years. And whether or not you really click with your counselor, one of the best piece of advice that I can give you about high school, which will also apply for when you're in college, is to find a mentor. Find someone who you trust, who can be an ally and an advocate for you, and seek their advice. Ask for their input when you're struggling with a problem, when you have a question. It may or may not be your counselor. It may be a teacher. It may be a coach. It may be a resource officer. It might be someone that you just see in the hall every day, but find someone that you feel comfortable with, and that will really help you sort of find that path through high school, and it will work when you get to college as well. My second piece of advice for you at school is to ask for help. It's not always easy to do, but it is incredibly important to do it if you can. That usually means going to school early or staying late, or maybe giving up a lunch period so that your teachers can see the effort that you're putting in. It is impossible when you're a teacher to not be swayed by a student trying really, really hard. You meet your students where they are as an educator. And so when you see them trying really hard, you want to try back. So ask for help if you need it, but also, again, just working to build those relationships and get to know the opportunities that your school has to offer. When there is an opportunity, a special opportunity, the teachers are going to mention it to the students they know the best or they see the most. Let that be you. The final thing I would say is that 9th grade is a really good time to work on your study habits. As we near the end of the school year, I imagine you're seeing how important that is. It is one of the best pieces of advice that you'll get from any coach or advisor. We have an executive function coaching team here at Applerouth, and a lot of the advice that they give is to establish a time and place for everything school and everything fun, and they shouldn't be the same. To the extent that they can be. So having even just, I know a lot of people during the pandemic sort of had a box for work and a box for play because they only had one desk. They couldn't sort of, or have another room to go to or another desk to work at, but they did have one sort of workspace. And so they would transition it from, fun to work time. Even though hopefully you're back at school and in person, you can still do the same thing in terms of establishing some really strong work patterns so that this is a time for work and you will not be interrupted by text messages and lures to play video games with your friends while it's work time. And then when it's playtime, you will just be focused on the fun. That's the gift that you can give yourself if you give the time to the schoolwork that it needs. So if you're struggling with organizational skills, if you're struggling with organizing your time, if you're looking down the barrel at these final exams and you don't even know how to start, please go back to number 2 and ask for help. It is really important that you recognize that you're establishing patterns now, habits now that you'll be relying on forever after. I still, when I need to memorize something, I still use the tactics that Miss McCready taught me in 8th grade. So the way that you learn how to learn now will be incredibly beneficial to you going forward. In terms of after school time, a little bit of advice here is very simply to get involved. There's no formula for what colleges are looking for. I'm asked all the time, what do colleges want to see? What are colleges looking for? They're looking to know you. If they had an idea of the perfect candidate, the things that student should be doing, and that's what they followed in terms of all of their admissions decisions and the way that they evaluated candidates, what would happen is that everyone would be the same on their college campus. And that wouldn't be any fun at all. That's not why you're attracted to the school. You're attracted to the diversity in the community, diversity, the things, backgrounds that students So they're not looking for one kind of get to know you and what you is important, what you value. And the way that you did that to them is how you spend your time. So difference, I think, in some ways between middle school and high school is that in middle school you're doing it for yourself, and in high school you're doing it in part to show other people what you think is important, so that you can make a difference in the places that you want to, and the places that you value. High school, especially the early part of high school, is a really good time to start diversifying your interests and trying new things. So start with what you're interested in and then see where it could lead as well. So for example, somewhat famously in the Ivy League, that's the 8 schools in New England that are part of a athletic conference called the Ivy League. You've heard of them all, I'm pretty sure. When they're evaluating an application, athletics counts as just one extracurricular activity. So you could play 3 sports, you could play 5, but it's just one activity from their perspective. So you've got to take that interest in sports and find other ways to apply it, other avenues to pursue. So if you're interested in sports and you're a great athlete, for example, you're already at the game, maybe offer to cover it for the school paper or take the picture for the yearbook. Now you're in a new activity. You might find that you're really interested in communications. Maybe sports management will be your thing down the road. But so start with what you're interested in and then take a little step away from it and see what's interesting to you there. And if you don't find something you like, go back again and try again. So start where your interests are, explore them fully, and demonstrate them to the rest of the world. The other thing I wanted to point out while we're here is that jobs and family responsibilities count as extracurricular activities. So if you are, for example, like the oldest of 3 siblings, and half of your after school responsibility is getting a snack for your siblings and getting them started on their homework, and you're kind of their de facto tutor, that's a responsibility that you have, and that's something that counts, so to speak, as an extracurricular activity. So if you are in a position where you need to keep a job to help with family finances, that is absolutely an important activity, just as it would be to join a club or join organizations or play a sport. I also want to mention that summer is a really good time to explore your interests and try new things. Particularly the summer between 9th and 10th grade is a chance to really try something and you're not committed, right? I mean, you join a new club in 9th grade and you think, oh gosh, I'm going to have to do this for 4 years. What if I don't like these kids anymore after a few years? What if this isn't interesting to me? But summer is a really, really good time to just sort of try something and then jump out if it's not a good thing, or if it is interesting or a little bit of is interesting to you, taking another path. So summer might be a time where you get your first job. Work experience is incredible. When I was a reader at Emory, John Ladding, who's still the Dean of Admissions, would talk so much about how incredible it was to hear students talk about their work experience, the responsibility that they learned from having their first job, and everything, how it helped them appreciate everything that goes into the services and goods that they utilize every day. An internship is another great way to try out a career. There might be something that's interesting to you and you know someone who's working in that field. Ask them for their advice. You could ask them for an informational interview, even if they don't necessarily have interns from who are in high school. Those conversations often turn into something a little more promising down the road, or when an opportunity comes up, they remember that you were interested and they might call you. Volunteering with a community service organization or just volunteering your time is a great way for you to learn new skills, to make a difference in the areas that you think are valuable and important. And if your school does require service hours, the summer is a great time to get them done if you have a lot of other obligations during the school year, particularly if you, as we said, play a sport and are taking a lot of advanced classes. There's not a lot of extra time to do those things. You can also look at an academic program during the summer. We mentioned before about that math pathway, right? If you're trying to get to calculus your senior year and you're only starting algebra as a 9th grader, you're going to have to double up somewhere along the way. So maybe over the summer is a time to knock out geometry. So it might be something through summer school, or it might be pursuing an academic program that might be sponsored by a local college, or the chance for you to be on a college campus and try being a little bit independent, practice a little bit of adulting, as well as exploring an interest. But a summer should have not just work and not just responsibility to it. There should absolutely be time every summer for your family to re-engage with one another. And there should absolutely be time for fun and maybe even a little bit of boredom. Your couch and your bottom should definitely have a hot date at some point during the summer. That's also a time for rest and restoration, and that's really important to you too. I think the summer is a little bit like a recipe, and it needs to have lots of different ingredients in order to be really successful. So this is where I said it was okay to play video games. All right, so looking ahead, let's talk a little bit about what to expect, what's coming down the line. One thing I want to talk a little bit about, of course, is standardized testing. There's been a lot in the media about how many colleges have gone test optional, which means that you are not required to submit standardized test scores as part of your application. It's important for you as ninth graders and parents of ninth graders to know that those policies were often short-term policies that were established during the pandemic when people were not able to safely take a standardized test or couldn't access it at all. And those policies may sunset before it's time for you to apply for college. So don't count on the process that we're in right now being the process that you will experience. Typically, your standardized testing cycle really officially begins with taking the PSAT your junior year. That's the year that it counts for the National Merit Scholarship Program. And it's kind of the official sort of bell ringing of the beginning of the process. But many schools will have their students take a practice for the practice test. The P in PSAT stands for practice. So some schools will have ninth and 10th graders taking the PSAT, or if you're in a part of the country where the ACT is more popular, you take PLAN, which is the pre-ACT option. So you might have some practice at that test in ninth or 10th grade, and then you take it in an official kind of way your junior year. When you take standardized tests will really depend on two things. One is what math you're taking, and the other is your general schedule. So in terms of math, you don't want to start prepping for the SAT or the ACT until you've taken Algebra 2, or at least are simultaneously taking Algebra 2. And the reason for that is because the math that's on those tests is what you learn up to and including Algebra 2. And so if you take it 2 years, if you try to take the test 2 years before you've taken Algebra 2, you're going to have to learn that math for the sake of the test instead of just, having already learned it for school and then letting the test show it off one more time. And so for a lot of students, that the right time for that is probably somewhere around junior year. For some people, it's a little bit earlier because they're a little more advanced in math, or they're recruited athletes and they need to submit test scores to coaches in order to be considered for an on-campus visit, something like that. For other students, they want to do it during the school year because they're kind of in the rhythm of school. Other students want to push it into the summer because they'll have more time and energy to focus on their prep then. Whatever is the right time for you is absolutely fine. You just want to bear in mind that typically you want to have time to take the test 2 or 3 times to get your best score, and that you need to complete your testing by the fall of your senior year in order to be on time with your applications. The other thing I wanted to mention to your class in particular is that you all will be the first to take the digital SAT. So the College Board, in their infinite wisdom, changes the SAT every now and again. And one of the things that they're doing right now is working to bring it into this digital age. So the SAT will actually be an hour shorter than it is for current high school students when you take it, and it will be taken entirely online. So Applerouth has worked really hard and will continue to work very hard to be ready to help our students through that process. But it's important for you to know that that's coming. The second thing that I would say in terms of looking ahead is to just start building your college awareness. If I could ask you all right now, how many colleges and universities you think there are in the United States, I imagine there would be lots of different answers. I'm hoping you'd probably say at least 50 because, there's one in every state. But the number is actually significantly higher than that. It's closer to 4,000. And that's just in the US. And there are lots of other places in the world where you could pursue higher education. In the end, most people couldn't name more than 50 of those schools. And so the way that you build your awareness of colleges is literally to just notice them. Everywhere you go, there's a college or two or eight, and is a chance for you to get to know what makes schools different and what makes them tick. You don't need to be necessarily signing up for in-person tours and that sort of thing yet as a high school freshman. You might want to do a little more lurking, a little more looking from afar, but you can definitely do a walk around campus and try the ice cream, and see if it's a place you'd want to get to know a little bit better. But there are things that you will want to experience for yourself to know whether or not they'll play an important role for you in your college search. You don't know why size matters so much about colleges until you see the difference between a small school where you'll recognize people all throughout the day on campus and a really large school where you might not see anyone until you get back to your dorm at night. You will want to kind of get a sense for how these different kinds of experiences based on size and location and course of study, how those things would impact your own college experience. So build your college awareness by noticing the colleges that are around when you're in a place you usually aren't. So if you're traveling for a family event, maybe there's a first communion or a bar bat mitzvah, or you're going to be celebrating Holi with your family in India, and you want to learn about schools abroad. Like wherever you are, whatever you're doing is a chance to get to know some new schools, and that will help you get to know how you respond to them, and that will be valuable and important to you when the time comes. But you don't actually need to be, signing up for official visits or anything like that quite yet. The other thing that's really important is for your family to have an honest and open conversation about the cost of college. It is really important to have a sense of what the family scholarship has in it before you go searching for schools. Some students are in a very fortunate position where their families have been able to anticipate the incredibly skyrocketing cost of college, and have somehow managed to save that. But most of us are setting a budget with our kids to talk about how much college actually costs and how much we have saved and what's going to cover the gap in between. And so it's just important to have that open and honest conversation as a family from the start. And that will help make sure that you'll have great choices on the back end rather than sort of hoping that magically it will all come together. So if you won't be able to save very much for college, then you're going to have a conversation about how do we find out more about financial aid and how do we look for outside scholarships. There's always a way to get to college. You can start through a community college pathway. You could do dual enrollment in your high school to get ahead in your college search. There are all kinds of pathways to get to college and to get to your degree. So cost shouldn't be prohibitive, but it does have to be something that you talk about as a family in a realistic and thoughtful way. So that's where I want to leave it in terms of general advice, because I want to be able to take a lot of questions tonight and answer the things that are on your hearts and minds. So I'm just going to remind you that we're here at the beginning of our path to college, talking with the ninth graders tonight. Next Wednesday, some of my colleagues will be talking about the 10th grade experience, that very middle part of the high school career. And then finally, we'll be working with the juniors on May 25th. If you register for any of these events, you get a bonus webinar on the Tuesday before the Wednesday events. So there was one last night. If you missed it, you'll get the recording. There's another one next week that's talking about getting ready for finals. And the one on the 24th, I'll be on again with Kim Lifton from WOW, which is a essay writing support program for juniors who are starting to think about working on their college essays over the summer. So we hope you'll be able to join us for any or all of those programs that are helpful to you. So let me jump in and start taking your questions. So I hope you'll keep popping them in. I see we have several. So we're going to talk a little bit about your questions and hopefully address all the topics that you want to get covered. So one student was asking about how do you get an internship, which I think is a really terrific question. the easiest place to start is just to start with the things you're interested in and start with the things you'd want to do anyway. So for example, I live in Atlanta and we have a couple of really cool places that our kids got to explore a lot when they were younger, including the Atlanta Zoo and the Georgia Aquarium. And those are two places that have internship programs for high school students. So if there's a place you like to hang out, a place that you think is interesting, just take a look and see, just kind of do a little search on their website to see if they have an internship program or a volunteer program, which is what the Children's Hospital of Atlanta calls their program. So it's really just kind of starting where you are and taking that next step. Another approach you can take, so that's sort of an organizational approach. The other approach you can take is a relational one, which is to think about people you know who do stuff you think is cool and asking for their advice. So I have a kid who is super into gaming, and so we talk to everybody we can find who has anything to do with esports and video game design, and just keep talking to them and asking for their advice, and eventually that's going to turn into an internship opportunity. The other thing is to recognize that an internship does not have to be something particularly formal, and it doesn't have to be a long time to be something that's meaningful to you and helps you determine if that's a path you want to continue on or if you're ready to make another choice. So that's a little bit of advice about how to get started with internship searches. Another question is asking about taking calculus by the end of high school. Is that recommended? And I think it really, really, really depends on the student. If you've got a student who's thinking about engineering, and if you don't know what that is, let me just sort of back up and tell you a little bit more, because when I was applying to college, there was a question at the top of the application that said, do you want to apply to the College of Arts and Science or the School of Engineering? And I looked up at my dad, who was making dinner, and I said, Dad, do I want to be an engineer? And he laughed. So I checked the other box. You should make a more informed decision than I was making. So I thought engineers ran trains, and it turns out they actually design bridges. It's two different kinds of engineers. So the engineers we're talking about are people who are problem solvers by training, and they are people who love math and they love science and love them both the most at the same time. So if you have a student who's interested in a STEM field like engineering, then it might be a great idea to think about getting to calculus if that's a possible and reasonable approach by your senior year. But it is by no means required, and it may not be the right path for your student. So I would seek some advice from your guidance counselor at school, and then also pose that question to admissions officers at schools that are interesting to you. Admissions officers love to answer student questions. They love, love, love to hear from students. And those are the kinds of questions you can ask them. So let's say you're interested in going to school. I'm just going to use some examples in Georgia. If you're thinking about going to Georgia Tech, they might have a different interest and different answer to that question than the admissions officer at Oglethorpe might have. So ask a question and see if it suits them. A quick question about the PSAT. Is it digital? Since we mentioned that the SAT will be digital for your class, you will have a completely digital experience through that suite, which is to say that the PSAT that you will take your junior year will be digital as well. So it's coming, ready or not, here we go. If our child has already finished Algebra 2, should they consider taking the SAT as a sophomore, or does that not make sense due to the test changing? I think that is a terrific question, and the answer, like most things you'll hear from every person who works in admissions and college counseling, is it depends. So one of the things I would suggest is that you take a practice test to see whether or not you feel ready for the test. I think that's really sort of the most basic thing. At Applerouth, we offer practice tests, and we're delighted to let you take them and see how you score and see how it suits you. There are some students who are in your class who are going to go ahead and finish all their testing before the digital revolution happens. And there are other students who will wait to start until after it has begun. And what is right for you really depends on your comfort level. I will say, again, just to use my own children as examples, our oldest child, who is through the standardized testing process at this point, is very glad to not have to take a digital test. And our younger child, who will be following behind your class, 100% will be delighted to take a digital test and will wait to do it. So I think it depends on personal preference. If you've already finished Algebra 2, you have the choice, and it's yours to exercise. I think it's important for students to recognize how many choices they have through this process. A lot of ink has been spilled about test optional, but the reality is most of the parts of your application are optional, right? I mean, it's up to you whether or not you take hard classes or do well in them. Okay, I mean, you might have a case that your teacher has something to do with that too, but right, we make choices about the things that are important to us. And students, we can focus a little too much on the choice that the college will make, but really most of the choices in the college application process are yours. You decide where to look, you decide where to apply, and in the end, you decide where to go to college. So you can make a choice about whether or not you want to take standardized testing. You make a choice about whether or not you want to focus on the ACT or the SAT, because the colleges love them both the same. They have no preference. And you can make a choice now about whether or not you want to participate in this digital SAT or pull things up sooner. All of those are choices, and all of those are choices that you can explore. Okay, we've got a couple of questions about choices that students may or may not have in the process, choices about where they go to high school, and choices about what kinds of academic programs that they pursue. So let's talk about those things for a few minutes. So from a college perspective, they just take what you give them. So they're not going to give you an answer to a question about, should I go to this high school or that high school? Should I take this class or that class? They're going to want, you to make the choices that are best for your family. And I think it's important when you're picking a high school or picking a place to live, that you really focus on the experience that your child will have in high school, and not be too concerned just about the outcomes, because you trust if you have a good experience while you're in high school, then the outcomes will be positive for your child. So if I was looking to make a choice about a high school for my child, I would be thinking about what kinds of resources the school has and how well they match up with what my student is interested in. When I was a tour guide when I was in college at Duke, I used to talk about the free electron laser that we had on campus. I'm going to tell you guys a secret. I've never saw it because I wasn't interested in the free electron laser, and I wasn't really that interested in lasers in general. And so it kind of didn't matter that I went to a college that had one, even though it was super cool at the time. So you want the resources to match up with your interests or with your child's interests. So I think I'd be looking, if I were picking a high school for my child, I'd be thinking about what resources do they have, how well do those resources match with my student. Is it a place where it's cool to be smart? Because I think that's really important for kids. And are there lots of different pathways and opportunities for my child to become themselves? Those would be the things that I would be paying attention to. I would also pay attention to how much runway there is, right? Sort of how far can a student go if they're interested in those kinds of things. So that has something to do with looking at the rigor of the curriculum. Now, again, sometimes you're just sort of stuck with what your school has to offer. And so some schools have an AP program, an advanced placement program. Some schools have an IB program, International Baccalaureate, and some schools offer DE, dual enrollment. Some schools offer all of those things. So sometimes you have the choices you have, and you make the best you can with the choices that you have. Other times you have all of those different choices. I think if you talk with people who work in highly selective admissions, which is to say, a colleague of mine calls them the highly rejected colleges. If you talk to those schools, they're going to tell you that they would prefer that you exercise all of the opportunities on your high school's campus before you look for others, which is to say that they'd like to see you pursue all of the AP courses or IB courses that your school offers before you pursue dual enrollment. But there are exceptions to that advice. For example, if cost is a big concern for your family, then it may make more sense to do dual enrollment, because at some places, when you do dual enrollment, you can actually finish an associate's degree at the same time that you're graduating from high school, and you can just then finish a bachelor's degree in 2 years if you stay within your state's university system. So that may be the best choice for your family. So all the advice that you hear, there's never just sort of one size fits all. So you want to think about sort of what works best for your family. If you're making a choice between dual enrollment and AP or IB, you're also making a choice potentially about whether or not you're going to spend most of the last part of high school on your campus or on a college campus. And that might have some implications for your extracurricular activities, your chance to take on leadership roles, and that sort of thing. So think about the unintended consequences of a choice. Some students want to be able to do dual enrollment because it works better with their schedule for work and that sort of thing. If you're talking about between an IB and an AP program, the biggest difference is that when you do a full IB diploma program, everything is hard. Every class is advanced. There's no sort of rest. And with the AP program, you get to kind of pick and choose. So you can take the most rigorous courses in the areas that you're ready for and excited about. And then there are other places where you might step back and not take on quite as much rigor, might not be as ready for it. So there are lots of different variables out there, and that's going to be an individual choice more than anything. Okay. We've got a question about financial aid and scholarships. So the first thing is to find out whether or not you qualify for need-based financial aid. The easiest way to do that is to use something called the FAFSA forecaster, FAFSA. The free application for federal student aid is how students apply for need-based financial aid in college. You will not fill it out now. You do not actually complete it until you are a senior in high school and applying for college, and you apply for financial aid at the same time, but you can use the FAFSA forecaster to get a sense of whether or not you're going to be eligible for need-based financial aid. The other thing you can use is something called a net price calculator. By law, it has to be within 3 clicks of the homepage of every college or university in the United States. So if you just Google name of college and NPC or net price calculator, it will pop up. Some of them are very specialized, some of them are not, but you answer a few questions and it will tell you roughly what the cost of the college will be for you. Were you to get in, and all the things you said about your financial situation are actually true. So then you'll know if need-based financial aid is going to be an option for you. If you will not qualify for need-based financial aid, then you may look for outside scholarships or for university funded scholarships. So colleges may have their own scholarship programs, and then there's the magic money that you can find and apply to anywhere. That's the hardest thing to find, of course. It's just money lying around. Remember this when you are rich and famous, that you want to make it more available and accessible to high school students in the search. There are a couple of websites that I think are really helpful. Scholarship 360 is one. Going Merry is another one. FastWeb is one that's been around for a long time. You do get a lot of email from signing up for these services. So that's one thing to know, right? If you know anything about the digital age we live in, know that everything costs something. And so it may cost information and time, even if it doesn't cost anything. But those are all free resources. There's also an app that I really like called Scholly. I think that maybe costs $6 or $7, but those are all good sources of searching for outside scholarships. And then looking for college specific scholarships, that does take some hunting, and your counselor at school is going to be a good resource for that. They probably have a newsletter that they send out on a weekly or monthly basis that will list a lot of local scholarships as well. And those are dynamite to check out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about service hours. So one thing is that your school may or may not require students to pursue service hours. That's a decision that's made from your high school. Colleges do not require them, and they certainly don't want you to do them out of obligation. They only want to know if that's something that's important to you and that you would pursue that. So it really just depends on whether or not your school requires them, but that's what they're for, I guess, is often for a high school requirement. There are some national volunteer programs and awards that you can apply for. There's a presidential service award that you can get if you have done a certain number of service hours and apply for that and that sort of thing. But that's just a feather in your cap. That's just saying you did what you said you did in terms of the hours, and that's the important part. So I hope that addresses that question. There was a student who was asking about their school not having necessarily clubs and programs that go to national level competitions, and that's absolutely fine. There are some ways that you can get involved with those things yourself. For example, if you're interested in the sciences, you can get involved in science fairs like I think it's now Intel. It used to be the Westinghouse. I mean, the sponsor of that scholarship or of that science fair has changed a lot over time, but that is something that you could pursue independently. You don't have to have your school support to do that. There's also a program called First Robotics if you're interested in robotics and engineering and that sort of thing at all. And that, again, you can build a team independent of your school. You could get involved in scouting. There's always a troop that's near you that would welcome students. It doesn't have to be specifically tied to your school. And then I just, as I say, you just follow your interests. There's a website called Teen Inc. that publishes a lot of student work. So if you're interested in writing or the arts, that's a great way for you to be able to kind of present your work on a national level. And so those are just a few ideas. I hope that gets you started. Okay, so okay, I'm trying to make sure we cover as many of these questions and topics as we can. Okay, I love that there's a little bit of a question about quiet students. And as someone who is naturally really extroverted, I think it's really important for me to stop and listen to people who are quiet by nature, because they have really interesting things to say if I just slow down. So I want to honor the quiet students out there and help you find a way to show yourself to the world. Because I do think that the college application process is challenging for students who don't feel comfortable putting themselves out there, as the expression goes. And so my advice is really to really, as I've said before, focus on the things that you love first and foremost. So you might really love making art. And you do that probably just for yourself, or maybe it's a form of therapy for you, right? That's your creative outlet. And then you think about, well, how could I share that with someone who is trying to get to know me, right? Because if you're going to get to know me, you have to know how I spend my time, what I think is important, what I value. And so that means I have to show you my art. And so how am I going to do that? And so maybe that's creating a website nobody else has access to unless you give it to them, where you post your work. Maybe that's doing something like Teen Inc., which I talked about before, which gives you a little bit of a platform to put your work out there and get a little bit of feedback on it. Maybe you start talking with the art teacher at school about getting feedback on your work. Maybe they know someone at a local university, so art program, who could give you some advice about that. So whatever is kind of your thing, just think about how you could share that with other people. The other thing about if you have a hard time with asking for help, which is completely understandable and a very natural thing, is maybe don't ask for help, but just be around. So one of the things that I learned to do when I was in college was to do my homework in the help room. There was a calc help room, and it was staffed by the faculty in the math department and all of the graduate students. And at first I just went when Dr. Hodel was there. Margaret Hodel was the chair of the math department, and she was my calculus teacher, and she and I had a very strong bond getting me through that class. I'm grateful to her. And at first I just went when she was there, but I found that if I started my homework on my own and I didn't get it, and so I'd pack it up and I'd do some history homework or English homework or something instead, and then I'd go to the calc help room and I couldn't even remember how I got as far in the problem as I did. And so I realized I just needed to already be there, and then it was easier to ask for help in real time. So going in when there's open study hours or when a teacher just is open and available for extra help, you can just say, I'm just going to do my homework in here. And if I run into a problem, I can ask. And teachers are usually really receptive to that and letting you just kind of hang out in the room so that you're just already there when you have a question. That's easier, I think, than going in for specific help and having to have a very specific question. So that one I think is just a little bit of just showing up. I hope that's helpful. Okay, I love this question. When should a student know what they want to do for a career? I hope it's sometime after they turn 50. Many of us don't know what we want to do for a career while we're in our careers, let alone when we were in high school. So you don't need to know what you want to do for a career. You just have to know what you want to do next. Mostly you want to figure out what are the skills that you have that you want to be called upon to use, and then what are some ways that you can use those skills that will get you paid. So you absolutely can apply to college undecided on your major. It's the most popular major on any college campus is undecided, because usually half of the student body is still undecided. They have until the end of their sophomore year to declare. It's perfectly fine to not be certain. What you don't want to be is clueless, right? There's a difference between being undecided and clueless. And clueless means you haven't even started trying to look. So explore some things, rule them out, rule them in. But it is perfectly fine to go through the college application process as an undecided student. Just make sure when you're looking at colleges, you're looking for programs that have a really strong advising program. So that you will be able to figure out what you want to do. There are a number of schools that have an exploratory program for first year students that will introduce them to different aspects of the college, different academic programs and fields. That might be a good fit for you if you're not sure what you want to do. The other thing is a lot of schools use a program called Naviance or one called SCORE at your high school. You might have access to that. And both of those have an interest inventory that you can take as part of it. One is based on what color is your parachute, and the other is based on something called U Science. And they give you some ideas about things that you're interested in that you might want to try. So that's maybe a way to get a little bit of an idea. But it's perfectly fine to graduate from high school without being sure. Okay. These are good questions, but there are many that are very specific, so we may not. Let's try and see if we can get through all of them. Okay, so recommendations for summer programs. There are a lot of pricey ones, but there are also ones that are not as expensive. I would look at local universities as a way to find some options that might be a little bit more affordable. I would definitely ask at your high school. And then it also depends on the kind of thing that you're trying to do. There are some programs that provide training, and then you have something that you could earn money with. So you paid, there's a gap year program, which is a program for between high school and college, where you can learn how to become a captain on a boat, and then you get paid to be a captain. So it can balance it out, right? Something that was expensive and something that pays you. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a starting point. If you're interested in research and interested in the medical field, the best way to start that search is by talking to human beings who are also interested in those things. You have a doctor. I hope you probably have a pediatrician that you've been going to once a year who's been telling you that you're growing or that you stopped growing and that you're doing a really great job eating fruits and vegetables. Ask that person and every other person who works in that office how they got started in that field and what they find interesting about that. That's an informational interview that you can do while you are there for your checkup. You don't have to know the president of a research program at a college or university. You can start with the person that you see every day, or not every day, obviously, but every year for your checkup. So I would absolutely start with that. And then if you're interested in academic research, I would talk with your high school teachers, particularly if you have any teachers who've recently been in graduate school themselves, because they probably still have connections at the university that they attended that they might be able to help introduce you to. There are good. Someone's asking about esports programs in Georgia. We do have an esports team, and you can reach out to them about getting involved. I gave some suggestions about scholarships and scholarship searches. I mentioned Scholarships 360, Going Merry, and Scully as a few of the ones that you might want to research. Okay, here's a great question about, sort of, did I take too much too fast? I took a lot of rigorous courses this freshman year, and my grades are a little bit lower as a result. So you have learned the lesson that I was talking about earlier in terms of that balancing act. Your story is whatever it is, right? There's whatever is your truth, and you'll tell that story. Colleges love a comeback kid. So they love to see positive grade trends, upward grade trends, and that sort of thing. If you took on a little too much, just balance it out next year. Maybe now, because you did it, you're ready. Now you know what to do, and you kind of had the learning curve of ninth grade and you're ready to keep going with it. But if not, then take a little bit of a half step back. And if you are taking 4 honors classes, just take 2. And that until you get sort of that, your grades back up to where you want them to be. So try and make sure that you're always keeping in mind the balance. And if you start to see yourself struggling next year, maybe recognize that isn't a pattern you want to continue, and ask for help or take that half step back, so that you still are building your self-confidence along with your GPA. Okay, some people are putting their same questions in 3 or 4 times, and I want to make sure we get to all of them. Okay, so a question about IB programs. So we mentioned the International Baccalaureate program before. It's a specialized academic curriculum. It's a very rigorous program, and it's an all-encompassing. So you, in addition to taking 3 high-level courses and 3 standard-level courses, as they call them, but they're still really hard. You also take a theory of knowledge class, which is a philosophy class, and you do something called CAS hours, which is Community Arts and Service, I think, is what it stands for. So it's an sort of all-inclusive experience, and there are a lot of students who are attracted to programs like that, or their parents who are interested in them, pursuing those kinds of programs. And if you have that to take advantage of, that's terrific. But if it's not right for you, even if it's offered at your school, you certainly do not need to do that. A question for students who are dreamers. So let's talk a little bit about that. So for students who might not have a green card or citizenship, the path to college can be a little bit more complicated. It really depends on your state. There are some states that support students who are dreamers at their state universities. Some of them are supported at private colleges within the state. It really just varies state by state. But there is a program, I'm forgetting the name of it. But if you Google it, hopefully the Google machine will help you find it out. There is a program for dreamers specifically that helps them identify colleges that have open programs. And you can also ask the colleges what their policy is with regard to students based on their status, if they are refugee students, if they're dreamers, if they're applying for a green card, if they already have citizenship. So it really does vary school by school, and it takes a lot of legwork to find it, but there are pathways. You can self-study for an AP exam. That was another question we got. You can also work with Applerouth. We help a lot of students who don't have an AP program in their school pursue the AP exams. So you can take them without having taken the course. You can take the exam without having taken the course. You have to be registered for it. You have to have a high school that's willing to let you do that. But we can help you with that if that's something that you're looking for. Okay, so I think we've covered a fair number of the broad questions that we've talked about. So I want to wrap us up. I know we're close to the end of time with a little bit of advice about how to get started on this search and thinking about what comes next. So I think I hope that you've gotten a lot of good advice and good suggestions and ideas tonight. And I think you've also seen that there are lots of questions that still remain for you. And so what I want each of you to do is to think about what question you have that wasn't answered tonight and who in your life might be able to answer it for you. If we can help you here at Applerouth, we're honored and delighted to be part of your journey. If your counselor at school might be a good first stop, if there's a family friend who knows a lot about education that you can ask, if there's a teacher at school that you really trust, but think about having that question and where to put it. And when all else fails, please call the college admissions office where you're interested, because they love to talk to you and answer your questions and provide guidance and support. There are many, many paths to college. The timeline is different for everybody. The search is a little bit different for everyone, but don't be afraid to just start. There were a lot of questions with how do I start? How should I start? And I think you just start. So you can start locally by looking at colleges that are in your neighborhood, in your region, in your area. You can start by just signing up for some mailing lists so you start getting a little more information and build a little bit more knowledge, and knowing that you want to go to college, knowing that you want to pursue higher education is an incredibly important first step. And as I said, important for you to have that conversation together as a family about how you can work to make that dream a reality. So I'm grateful for your time tonight and for the chance to share some of my experiences going through this process with you. I hope that we've been able to be of some help and some guidance tonight. I hope that if we can help you in the future, whether that's with academic tutoring, support on test prep, or executive function coaching, that you'll reach out to Applerouth and let us be a part of your journey. Thank you all so much. Good luck in the adventures ahead, and good night.